My name is Lena Mercer. I'm 32 years old, and I used to think peace was something you built once and then simply maintained. That if you arranged your life carefully enough, if you chose your habits with precision, if you made your home into a place where noise softened at the edges and everything had a purpose, then peace would hold. I know better now. I'm a data analyst by trade, which means I spend most of my days living inside patterns. I trust what repeats. I trust trend lines. I trust the quiet honesty of things that add up the same way twice. My work is spreadsheets, models, forecasts, clean conclusions pulled from messy information. And outside work, I liked my life to feel the same way: measured, intentional, calm. My apartment was the purest version of that. I had lived there alone for 2 years before my boyfriend moved in. It was a one-bedroom unit with tall windows, warm floors, and just enough light in the late afternoon to make the oak of my bookshelf glow like honey. I had built that bookshelf myself, sketching it for weeks before I ever cut a single piece of wood. I liked things that stayed where I put them. I liked the soft hum of the refrigerator at night, the exact weight of my blanket, the little ritual of setting up the coffee maker before bed so morning would arrive already halfway handled. Then Adrian arrived, and for a while, I thought the disruption was love. He was 30, a freelance event planner with a gift for making chaos look glamorous. He could turn a bare room into something glittering by instinct alone. He had charm in the way some people have expensive cologne, so constant you stop noticing it until it's everywhere. When we first got together, I liked how different he was from me. I liked the way he brought color into my neat little system. He made playlists with too much brass and not enough structure. He left ridiculous voice notes. He cooked without measuring anything, and somehow the food still came out good. For a while, it felt like balance. Then it started changing. Not in one dramatic moment. Not with one obvious betrayal I could point to and say there. That was the beginning. It happened the way mold happens under paint. Quietly. Out of sight. By the time you realize what you're looking at, it's already spread. It was small things at first. Friends dropping by with almost no warning because Adrian didn't want to make everything formal. Wine glasses left on the coffee table with rings of condensation beneath them. My noise-canceling headphones borrowed for his calls and returned with the battery drained to zero right before I needed them for a deadline. The front door unlocking at 11:30 at night because someone from one of his events just needed a place to regroup for a bit. Each thing by itself was survivable, mildly annoying. The kind of thing women get told not to make into a big deal if they don't want to seem controlling or difficult or uptight. So I tried not to. I would mention it gently. Adrian would smile, step closer, brush my arm, call me adorable in that half-teasing voice of his. He had a way of dissolving accountability into affection. By the end of the conversation, I would still be unsettled, but somehow I would also be the one feeling dramatic. And then there was Sienna. Sienna was his best friend, a photographer who was always in between things. Between apartments, between projects, between cities, between one disaster and the next. She moved through life like a woman who assumed some soft surface would always appear beneath her before she hit the ground. More and more often, that surface was my apartment. She would show up with a tote bag and a dramatic sigh and say she only needed one night. One night became weekends. Weekends became random Tuesdays. Sometimes I would come home and find her barefoot in my kitchen, drinking tea from one of my mugs like she paid rent there. She had a way of making herself at home that wasn't exactly rude on the surface. That was the problem. Nothing was blatant enough to justify the full force of my anger. It was all coded in friendliness, familiarity. Adrian would say, "Come on, babe, she's family." But she wasn't family. And even if she had been, family does not mean access without limits. I tolerated it longer than I should have because I loved him, because I knew what people say about women who are too territorial about space, because every time I drew a line, he blurred it with a grin and a kiss and some variation of "don't be like that." The last week before everything broke, I'd already felt something in me thinning. I had a project due on Wednesday, a complicated forecasting model for a client who changed their mind every 6 hours. By noon, I had finally dropped into that perfect tunnel of concentration where the outside world goes soft and distant and your brain feels like a blade. I was at my desk, headphones on, coffee gone cold beside me, when my phone buzzed against the wood. I glanced down. A text from Adrian. "Hey, babe. So Sienna's shoot got canceled, and her train got moved to Friday. She's going to crash with us a few more nights. Is it cool if she takes your side of the bed? I know you hate getting woken up and she tosses around a lot, so it's easier if I stay on the outside with her. She'll already be there when you get home. I read it once, then again, then a third time, slower. My side of the bed. Not the couch. Not an air mattress. Not even a conversation. A notice. A cheerful little logistical update about how I had already been displaced from the place where I slept, where I kept my book under the pillow sometimes, where I lay awake at 3 a.m. listening to rain against the glass, where I was most unguarded, most human. My side of the bed. What shocked me most was not the disrespect itself. It was the confidence of it, the assumption that this decision would be absorbed, managed, that I would grumble internally, maybe send a mildly irritated reply, then come home and adjust around the needs of 2 other people in the apartment I paid for. Something in me went completely still. Not hot, not wild, still. The kind of stillness that comes right before glass cracks. All the emotional static dropped out at once. The excuses, the softening, the maybe I'm overreacting reflex, gone. In its place came something clean and sharp and almost frighteningly calm. A conclusion. This was no longer a relationship problem. It was a structural one. I looked at the text for another full minute, then typed one word. Right. That was all. I put my phone face down on the desk and muted it. Then I opened a new browser tab. I didn't search how to communicate better in relationships. I didn't search healthy boundary setting. I didn't search whether I was being unreasonable. I searched for month-to-month furnished studio apartments. My filters were brutal and simple. Immediate move-in, clean building, decent locks, no long-term commitment. Far enough away to feel like another atmosphere. I found one across town in under 40 minutes. Too expensive for what it was. Bland in the photos, fresh white walls, generic furniture, narrow kitchen. But available now. Perfect. By the time I left work, I had signed the lease electronically and paid the first month plus deposit. The building sent me the lockbox code. When I drove there after sunset, the city looked strangely unreal. All traffic lights and reflected neon and people walking around inside lives I no longer envied. The studio was on the 5th floor of a new building that smelled faintly of paint and cleaning solution. The hallway lighting was too bright. The furniture was forgettable. The mattress looked stiff. It was the most beautiful room I had seen in months. Because it was empty. Because no one had decided anything about it without me. I stood in the center of that little studio with my bag in one hand and listened. No music. No laughter from the living room. No voice calling out for me to be flexible. Just silence. Blessed, sterile, impersonal silence. I didn't let myself sit down for long. There was still one thing left to do. I drove back to the apartment later that evening. Adrian's car was outside. So was Sienna's. Of course. Their presence, sitting there in the lot side by side, made something inside me harden even further. I unlocked the door as quietly as I could and stepped inside. Voices drifted from the bedroom, a laugh, his, then hers. I did not go in. I turned instead toward my office and moved with a focus so total it felt almost surgical. Work laptop, backup drives, passport, social security card, folder of lease documents, a week's worth of clothes, toiletries, chargers, my good fountain pen, the spare key to the storage unit, every essential that would hurt to lose if things turned uglier. At one point, I paused by the living room and looked at the oak bookshelf. Even in the low lamplight, it anchored the room. Clean lines, warm grain, something I had made with my hands when my life was still entirely mine. For the first time that night, I felt grief. Not for Adrian, for the version of myself who had kept making room. Then I picked up my bag, locked the apartment behind me, and walked away without making a sound. Back in the studio, I sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed and opened my laptop. If Adrian wanted to turn my home into shared public space, then I would answer in the one language I trusted more than emotion. Terms, conditions, deadlines. I began drafting the email. I wrote the email the way I would write a risk memo no one could misinterpret. No metaphors, no emotional detours, no pleading. Just facts arranged so cleanly they could cut. Subject, offer to sublease, apartment address. Adrian, per your text today, it is clear our housing needs have diverged. I have secured temporary alternate accommodation for myself effective immediately. This email serves as a formal offer for you to sublease the entire apartment at address for the remainder of my lease term. As you know, the lease is solely in my name. Terms are as follows. Monthly rent, $2,850. This reflects current market rate for comparable units in the building and is standard for a sublease arrangement. Security deposit, $2,850 due prior to execution of the sublease agreement. Utilities. Electricity, internet, and gas must be transferred into your name within 5 business days of signing. Leaseholder responsibility. I will remain primary leaseholder and remit payment to management, funded by your rent payment. You will remain responsible for compliance with all building rules and regulations. Please confirm acceptance by Friday at 5 p.m. If you decline, you and any guests must vacate the premises within 15 days, so I may make alternate arrangements for the property. Regards, Lena. I read it twice. Removed one sentence that sounded too personal. Adjusted one line so the deadline was unmistakable. Then I hit send. The apartment was silent around me, but not my silence. Not yet. The studio held sound differently. It had none of the layered memory of my real home. No little creak in the hall. No soft, familiar shift in temperature near the windows. Just a clean, impersonal hush, and the low, mechanical breath of the vent. I placed my phone face down on the bedside table. Then I turned it off completely. That was the part that felt almost luxurious. Not the leaving. Not the email. The absence. No vibration in my hand. No incoming performance. No argument blooming in real time. I slept in a strange room on a mattress that was too firm, and sheets that smelled faintly of industrial detergent, and for the first time in months, I did not fall asleep, bracing for interruption. The next morning, I woke before 7. Light pressed through the cheap blinds in thin white bars. I stood in the tiny kitchen in bare feet and made coffee that tasted like burned cardboard, then opened my laptop and worked remotely from the little laminate table by the window. I built a forecast model, took 2 calls, revised a presentation. My pulse stayed level all morning. It wasn't peace, but it was proximity to peace. Around lunchtime, I decided enough time had passed. I turned my phone back on. It detonated in my hand. The screen lit up so fast it almost looked panicked. Notifications stacked one over another in a flood. Missed calls, voicemails, texts, more missed calls, then more messages arriving before I could even clear the first row. Adrian, Sienna, his mother, Celeste. 2 mutual friends. Then Adrian again, over and over, like repetition itself could force access. I stared at the count first. 21 missed calls from Adrian, 7 from Sienna, 5 from Celeste. The texts were worse. 8:04 p.m. Where are you? 8:12 p.m. Did you seriously leave? 8:16 p.m. I saw your email. What the hell is this? 8:20 p.m. Lena, answer your phone. 8:44 p.m. This is insane. You cannot be serious about the rent. 9:03 p.m. You're trying to make money off me now. 10:15 p.m. Sienna feels awful, and you're making this so much bigger than it was. Then, from this morning, 9:07 a.m., pick up now. 9:22 a.m. You can't just disappear and send me legal language like I'm some random tenant. 9:31 a.m. My mom says this is probably not even enforceable. 10:02 a.m. Call me before I come to your office. I read every message once, slowly, and felt something almost colder than anger settle over me. Not because he was upset. Because even now, after the text, after the email, after the fact of me physically leaving, he still spoke as if the central injury here was to him, his inconvenience, his shock, his sense of being handled impersonally, as if the problem were my tone. My phone rang again. Adrian. I let it buzz twice before answering, then placed it on speaker and set it on the table beside my coffee. Finally, he snapped. No hello. No, are you okay? No pause to read the air. Just outrage, already mid-flight. What is wrong with you? He demanded. You vanished and sent me a landlord email in the middle of the night. What is this supposed to be? It's exactly what it says, I replied. A formal offer. He gave a short, disbelieving laugh, but there was panic under it. No. It's an eviction threat with a profit margin. That's what it is. The rent is $2,100, Lena. Yes, I said. The rent I secured on a 2-year lease is $2,100. He went quiet for half a beat. I continued before he could interrupt. The current market rate for a new lease or sublease in the building is $2,850. I checked comparable units before I sent the email. If you want the apartment without me in it, that is the cost. You can't do that to me. The wording almost made me smile. Do that to me. Not, how did we get here? Not, I'm sorry. Not even. I didn't realize how hurtful that was. Just immediate ownership of victimhood. Actually, I said, I can. Lena, be serious. I am being serious. His breathing sharpened over the line. I could picture him pacing now, one hand in his hair, performing disbelief for an audience that was probably sitting right there with him. I imagined Sienna on the edge of the couch, or maybe cross-legged on my bed, wide-eyed and offended on his behalf. Then he tried a softer voice. "This is about Sienna sleeping over. That's what this is? You're blowing up our relationship over a few nights?" "No," I said. "I'm responding to a pattern." "Oh my God." "A pattern," I repeated, still calm, "of you deciding that my comfort in my own home is negotiable." "That is so dramatic." "Is it?" "Yes. You texted me that another woman would be sleeping on my side of the bed," I said. "You didn't ask, you informed me. You made a decision about my body, my space, and my home as if I were the last person who needed to be consulted." There was silence then. Short, tight, not agreement, processing. He came back hotter. "She's my best friend, Lena. You know that. It was temporary." "It was not temporary," I said. "It was cumulative." "That doesn't even mean anything." "It means this did not start yesterday." He exhaled hard, then laughed again, but it sounded frayed now. "Wow. So this whole time you've just been quietly keeping score?" "No," I said. "I was quietly accommodating you. There's a difference." That landed. I could hear it land. He changed tactics again. "Okay," he said, voice suddenly wounded, almost tender. "Then come home and let's talk. If this upset you that much, fine. I'm sorry. Sienna can sleep on the couch. She'll leave tomorrow. We'll reset. But this..." He let out a breath. "This landlord thing? It's cruel." Cruel. Interesting word. Not humiliating. Not disrespectful. Cruel. As if formal consequences were somehow harsher than casual erosion. "If you had sent that text as a question," I said, "we might still be having a relationship conversation. But you didn't. You sent it as a conclusion, so I responded with one. Lena, the offer stands until Friday at 5. You're unbelievable." "No," I said quietly. "I've just become very clear." There was a muffled sound on his end, then movement, then another voice cut in without invitation. "Sienna, seriously?" she said. "You're doing all this over a sleeping arrangement?" I closed my eyes for a second. There it was. The entitlement in its purest form. Not even embarrassed. Not even hesitant. Just stepping into the center of a situation she should never have been this central to in the first place. "Hello, Sienna," I said. "Adrian is wrecked," she said. "He barely slept. He loves you. This is so extreme." I let a beat pass. Then, "Are you offering to co-sign the sublease?" Silence. I opened my eyes and stared out the studio window at the glass face of the building across from me. "I'm sorry?" she said. "Since you've involved yourself in the housing conversation," I replied, "I thought perhaps you were volunteering financial support. Are you prepared to co-sign, cover part of the market rent, submit proof of income?" A longer silence. Then Adrian again, sharp and furious. "Don't talk to her like that." "Then she should stop speaking on matters that concern my lease." "You are acting insane," he said. "No," I said, "I'm acting exact." And that, more than anything, seemed to make him lose his footing. People like Adrian know how to fight emotion. They can surf it, redirect it, drown it in charm, or overwhelm it with noise. But precision gives them nothing to grab. His next words came out ragged. "So that's it? You just left? You don't even care what this looks like?" I thought about that, because in some dim, humiliating corner of me, I had cared what it looked like for a long time. I had cared about being kind, flexible, mature, not petty, not territorial, not one of those women who make guests feel unwelcome or turn every boundary into a crisis. That concern had cost me so much more than money. "It looks," I said, "like a woman removing herself from a situation she was expected to tolerate indefinitely." He laughed once, bitter and disbelieving. "You sound rehearsed." "I sound rested." That did it. He started talking over me then, voice rising, all self-righteous fury and bruised ego. "You know what? Fine. Fine. Send the papers. If that's how you want to play this, send them. But don't pretend this means anything about us. We are not breaking up over one stupid misunderstanding." I felt my mouth flatten. There it was again. The arrogance of deciding reality by declaration. As if he could overwrite the meaning of what had happened simply because he disliked its consequences. "This is not a misunderstanding," I said. "It is to me." "That has never stopped you before." He went quiet. Then, low and venomous, "You're really enjoying this, aren't you?" "No," I said truthfully. "I'm done suffering through it." I ended the call before he could answer. For a long time after, I sat in the studio kitchen with the phone beside me and my coffee gone cold. My hands were steady. But under the steadiness, beneath the clean architecture of what I was doing, grief moved slowly through me like dark water. Not because I doubted the decision. I didn't. That part was over. It was grief for how ordinary the disrespect had become before it finally had to be named. Grief for every moment I had swallowed because it seemed too small to justify the size of my discomfort. Grief for the way women are trained to notice invasion and then narrate ourselves out of it. By 3 that afternoon, I made my next call. Property management. I introduced myself, confirmed my lease details, and asked about the official subletting process. The woman on the phone was efficient, almost cheerful. She confirmed exactly what I already suspected. As sole leaseholder, I was entitled to propose a subtenant, but the occupant would need to complete an application, provide proof of income, authorize a credit check, and meet building requirements. She also confirmed the current market rate for comparable units. I wrote everything down. Names, time, policy terms. Then I requested the official forms by email. An hour later, the first piece of narrative manipulation arrived. A text from Maya, a mutual friend. Hey, Adrian says you disappeared after a fight and sent him some really cold email. He sounds shaken. Are you okay? He's worried something is wrong. I stared at the message. Of course. Of course, that was the first version of me that would be circulated. Not a woman enforcing a boundary, not a tenant protecting her legal position, not someone reacting to a long pattern of disrespect. A woman who had become irrationally cold, possibly unstable, maybe dramatic, maybe spiraling, maybe having some kind of episode. Because that story was easier to sell, I replied carefully. I'm fine. There is no crisis. Adrian and I are dealing with a serious issue involving the apartment, and I'm handling it privately and formally. I'd appreciate it if people didn't speculate. Maya sent back a thumbs up and nothing else. Then, just before evening, Celeste emailed me. Subject, please don't do this. Lena, my heart is breaking for both of you. Adrian adores you, and whatever happened, surely it does not justify this level of coldness. Relationships go through moments. Good people speak face to face. They don't threaten each other with numbers and deadlines. Please reconsider before you destroy something beautiful out of anger. I read it once, then moved it into a folder labeled documentation. That was the thing none of them understood yet. They still believed this was a fight, something emotional, reversible, a matter of tone. But for me, something had already clicked into a new position. I was no longer waiting to be understood. I was moving pieces. Friday arrived slowly. I worked through the day from the studio, took 2 meetings, answered emails, revised a model, and checked my personal inbox only twice. At 4:58 p.m., exactly 2 minutes before deadline, Adrian's reply came through. Subject, offer to sublease, apartment address. Fine, I'll stay. I can't believe you're doing this, but fine. This doesn't mean we're over. We are going to fix this. I'll get the deposit from my mother if I have to. Send whatever paperwork you need. I read it 3 times. No apology. No real acknowledgement. Just outrage, entitlement, and that final sentence like a hand closing around something I had already set down. This doesn't mean we're over. I felt the chill of it. Not romance. Not hope. Control. He still thought he got to define the shape of this. Still thought agreeing to the financial burden meant the emotional structure would remain open for later revision. He was wrong. But I didn't tell him that yet. Instead, I forwarded the official building application forms. Then I attached the instructions from management and added one final note beneath them. Please complete all required sections and return by next Friday at 5 p.m. Incomplete applications will not be submitted. Regards, Lena. When I hit send this time, I felt it more clearly than before. Phase 1 was over. He had mistaken my silence for surrender. Now he was stepping into a system he could not charm, guilt, or outtalk. And somewhere under the exhaustion, under the heartbreak, under all that cold, deliberate structure, a quieter feeling began to rise. Not triumph, something better, relief. The first thing Adrian did, after agreeing, was try to undo the agreement without actually refusing it. That told me everything. 3 days passed. No completed application. No documents. No proof of income. No credit authorization. Just silence where action should have been. Then, on Monday afternoon, my phone lit up with a message from him. This is ridiculous. You know my income. Why are you making me fill all this out like I'm a stranger? I stared at the text for a moment. There it was again. That quiet assumption that rules were decorative, that structure existed for other people, that proximity to me meant exemption. I typed back. These are building requirements, not mine. The application must be complete to be submitted. His reply came almost instantly. You can vouch for me. Just tell them I'm approved. I exhaled slowly through my nose. That word, vouch. As if credibility could be transferred like a favor. As if my name, my lease, my history could be used to bypass the very system I had just stepped into for protection. I didn't soften it. I didn't explain twice. I didn't negotiate. I replied, I cannot and will not bypass their process. Submit the documents. Then I muted the thread again. But silence didn't mean stillness. Because while Adrian was delaying, he was also continuing. Sienna was still there. I knew before I had proof. Some things don't need confirmation. You can feel them in the pattern of behavior, in the tone of messages, in the way someone resists structure. They only resist when they believe they're still comfortable enough to stay. The confirmation came that night. A text from Mr. Alvarez, the older neighbor down the hall, who used to nod at me every morning when we both left for work. Hey, Lena, not sure if you're still around, but there's been loud music from your unit past 11 the last couple nights. Thought you'd want to know. I read the message twice. Then I set the phone down carefully on the table. Of course the space was being used like that now. My apartment, my lease, my responsibility, and suddenly not my control. I picked the phone back up and replied, Thank you for letting me know. Please feel free to report any future noise directly to building management as well. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Got it. Hope everything's okay. I didn't answer that part, because okay was no longer the metric. Control was. That night, I pulled up the building rules again. Noise policies, guest limitations, damage clauses. Everything that had once felt like background text now read like a manual. I printed them, highlighted sections, saved PDFs, created a folder on my desktop labeled Apartment Documentation. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was building a case. Wednesday evening, Adrian finally texted again. Not about the application. Not about the deadline. Not about anything that mattered. OMG. I'm so sorry. Sienna brought this plant as like a housewarming thing, and I was watering it and slipped. Some water got on your bookshelf. I wiped it right away. It should be fine. I felt something in my chest go very still. Housewarming. I read that word again. Housewarming. For what? For a space he had not secured. For a home he had not paid for. For a situation he had not respected. It wasn't just careless. It was narrative. He was already reframing the apartment as his. The bookshelf as incidental. My presence as something that used to be there. I didn't reply immediately. I stood up from the table and walked to the window. The city outside was moving the way it always moved. Lights shifting, cars passing, people walking in pairs, and alone and in clusters, all of them inside their own contained stories. And somewhere across that distance, in the apartment I had built piece by piece, someone had carried in a plant and called it a housewarming gift. I went back to the table, picked up my phone, and typed, Send me clear photos of the bookshelf, multiple angles, good lighting. No emoji, no softening, no reassurance. The response came 5 minutes later. 3 photos, blurry, careless, but enough. On the second shelf, near the center, I could see it, a pale, cloudy ring where the water had seeped into the finish. Not dramatic, not catastrophic, but unmistakable. I zoomed in, held my breath for a second, then exhaled slowly. That bookshelf had taken me 3 weekends to build. Not because it was difficult, but because I had done it carefully. Measured twice, cut once, sanded each surface until it felt like skin, oiled the wood in layers until the grain deepened into something warm and alive. It wasn't just furniture. It was proof of something I had once believed about my life. That if I put in the effort, if I paid attention, if I respected the process, things would hold. Now there was a ring on it, left by someone who had not asked permission to be there, watered by someone who had already decided it belonged to them. That was the moment something final settled into place inside me. This was no longer about a relationship. This was about exposure, risk, liability. I opened my laptop, pulled up a new email. Subject, lease compliance and property damage. Adrian, I have been informed of multiple noise disturbances originating from the apartment after 11 p.m. Please be advised that any findings issued by building management will be your responsibility. Regarding your message about the bookshelf, I have reviewed the photos. The damage is visible. The security deposit will be applied toward any necessary repairs. If costs exceed the deposit, I will pursue reimbursement. Additionally, I am still awaiting your completed sublease application. Submission deadline remains Friday at 5 p.m. Failure to comply will result in termination of the sublease offer and initiation of formal eviction proceedings. This is not a negotiation. Lena, I read it once, then sent it. The response didn't come from Adrian. It came from Celeste. Of course it did. She called me less than an hour later. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. Lena, she said, her voice already wrapped in disappointment. I don't even know what to say. You don't need to say anything, I replied. I do, she insisted, because what you're doing right now it's excessive. It's cold. Adrian told me about the bookshelf. It was a tiny spill. It was damage. It was an accident. It was avoidable. She exhaled sharply. You're threatening him over a watermark? I'm holding him accountable for the condition of a property under my lease. You're talking like he's a stranger. He is, in this context. There was a pause. Then, softer, more deliberate. You're going to regret this tone when everything calms down. I almost smiled, because she still believed there would be a return, that this was a storm, temporary, that I would circle back into softness once the emotional surge passed. There is no calm down after this, I said quietly. You say that now. I mean it. Her voice sharpened. You're punishing him. No, I said. I'm protecting myself. Another pause. Then lower. You're going to lose him. I looked out the window again, at the reflection of my own face in the glass, at the version of me that had already left. I already did, I said, and I ended the call. Friday came again. Second deadline. Second test. 5 p.m. passed. Nothing. At 5:12, my email chimed. From building management. Subject, sublease application. Incomplete. I opened it. The message was brief. The application submitted by the proposed occupant is incomplete. Required documentation, proof of income, and credit authorization has not been provided. We cannot proceed without full submission. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes for a moment, and let the clarity settle. This was not confusion. This was strategy. Adrian was trying to exist in the gap between agreement and enforcement, occupying space without committing to responsibility, waiting for me to get tired, waiting for me to soften, waiting for the structure to collapse back into something he could navigate emotionally. He thought this was still a game. He was wrong. I opened a legal template I had already saved earlier that week. Notice to cure or quit. Filled in the details. Names, address, violation, deadline. 3 business days to comply or vacate. Attached the email from management as supporting documentation. Saved it as a PDF, then emailed it. And for the first time since all of this started, I left the studio that evening. Drove across town. Walked into my building. Stood in the hallway outside my own apartment. The door looked exactly the same. Same number. Same small scratch near the handle. Same quiet presence. For a second, something inside me hesitated. Then I lifted the notice, pressed it flat against the wood, and taped it into place. Carefully, firmly, no wrinkles. No corners lifting. When I stepped back, it looked official. Impersonal. Final. I stood there for a few seconds longer than necessary. Not because I doubted it, because I understood it. This was the moment the story changed. Not for him, for me. Then I turned, walked down the hall, and didn't look back. The notice didn't explode anything. That was the strange part. I think somewhere deep down, Adrian had expected drama. A scene. Raised voices echoing down the hallway. Tears. Accusations. Something cinematic he could step into and respond to. Instead, he got paper. 3 business days. Typed language. No emotion to push against. And that's what finally unsettled him. The messages started less than 10 minutes after I taped it to the door. Lena, what the hell is this? You taped something to the door? Are you serious right now? Then, seconds later, call me, now. I didn't. Instead, I walked out of the building, got into my car, and drove back across town without answering a single notification. By the time I reached the studio, the messages had changed tone. From anger to disbelief to something closer to panic. You can't actually evict me. This isn't legal. I live there. You can't just decide this overnight. Then, please just talk to me. And finally, Lena, please. I read them all in silence, then locked my phone. The next morning, the calls began. Not just Adrian. Celeste. 2 unknown numbers. Then Sienna. The pattern was predictable now. Pressure from every angle. Emotion from one. Authority from another. Noise layered deliberately until something cracked. But I had already removed myself from that environment. Silence was no longer something they could interrupt. Around midday, I received a voicemail. Adrian. His voice sounded different. Not controlled. Not charming. Stripped. Lena, I got the notice. He exhaled sharply. This is insane. You're actually doing this. Over what? Over a bed? Over Sienna staying a few nights? A pause, then lower. You're going to ruin both our lives over this. I deleted the voicemail, not out of cruelty, out of discipline. Because if I listened to it again, if I let the tone of it seep in, it would try to drag me back into the emotional version of this situation. And that version no longer served me. The 3-day clock started ticking. Day 1, nothing. No documents. No completed application. No attempt to cure. Instead, I received a message late that night. You've made your point. Just stop now. I didn't respond. Day 2. More messages. Less anger. More urgency. I can't get all that paperwork together that fast. You know that. Just extend the deadline. Lena, please. I stared at the word please for a long moment. Because it would have worked before. Months ago, maybe even weeks ago. Back when I was still negotiating inside the relationship. Back when I believed that flexibility was kindness. Now it just looked like delay. I typed, the deadline is fixed. Then I muted the conversation again. That afternoon, another message arrived. From Sienna. Not loud this time. Careful. Measured. Lena, I know things got out of hand. I never meant to cause problems between you and Adrian. If you want, I can leave. I'll find somewhere else. This doesn't have to go this far. I read it slowly, twice, then set the phone down. Because what she was offering wasn't resolution. It was retreat. Temporary. Reversible. A step back so everything could slide quietly into place again once the pressure lifted. No. That door had already closed. I didn't reply. Day 3. The last day. The deadline. By noon, there was still nothing. No application. No documents. No movement. Just messages. More frequent now. More erratic. You're really going through with this. This is unbelievable. I don't even recognize you. That one almost made me smile. Because for the first time, he was right. By 3 p.m., the tone shifted again. This time, anger came back. Sharp. Defensive. If you do this, don't expect me to ever forgive you. You're destroying everything. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling. There it was. The final tool. Fear of consequence. Fear of loss. Fear of being the one who went too far. I had lived inside that fear longer than I realized. Measured my reactions against it. Softened my boundaries to avoid it. Bent around it until I barely recognized my own shape. Now it had nothing left to anchor to. At 5 p.m., the deadline passed. No submission. No compliance. No cure. At 5:07, my phone rang. Adrian. I watched it ring. Let it go. At 5:12, it rang again. I declined it. At 5:15, a text. Answer me. At 5:16, you can't just ignore this. At 5:17, we need to talk. At 5:18, Lena. I turned my phone off. Completely. Then I opened my laptop. Pulled up the court filing page I had bookmarked 2 days earlier. Filled in the required fields. Name. Address. Nature of filing. Attach the notice. Attach the documentation. Attach the lease. Attach the management email. Each file clicked into place like a step in a sequence I had already run through in my head. At the end, there was a payment screen. Filing fee. I entered my card details. Paused for half a second. Not out of doubt. Out of recognition. Because this was the point of no return. Not emotionally. That had already passed. Legally. Structurally. Once I clicked submit, the situation would no longer belong to us. It would belong to a system. I pressed confirm. The page refreshed. Submission successful. A confirmation number appeared at the top. I wrote it down. Saved the receipt. Closed the laptop. The room felt very quiet after that. Not empty. Settled. Like something that had been shifting for a long time had finally locked into place. That night, I slept without turning my phone back on. The next morning, when I powered it up, the messages had changed again. Short. Sharp. Less frequent. More spaced out. You actually filed. Are you serious? Then, my mom says this is going too far. Then, we'll see what the court says. I read them. Said nothing. And for the first time since everything started, I felt something new beneath the calm. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Something steadier. Control. The court date came faster than I expected. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just a date, a time, and a location printed in plain black text on an official notice. Tuesday, 9:30 a.m. Municipal Building, Room 214. I didn't feel nervous. That surprised me. Because if this had happened 3 months earlier, I would have been rehearsing conversations in my head, imagining outcomes, trying to predict how Adrian would present things, what he would say, how I would respond. Now there was nothing to rehearse. Facts don't need rehearsal. The morning of the hearing, I dressed the way I would for a client presentation. Clean lines, neutral colors, nothing that asked for attention, nothing that suggested softness either, just clarity. The building itself was exactly what you would expect. Fluorescent lighting, worn floors, rows of plastic chairs filled with people waiting for their own versions of resolution. Some tense, some bored, some whispering urgently to whoever sat beside them. I checked in, took my seat, waited. Adrian arrived 10 minutes later. With Celeste, of course. He looked smaller. Not physically, but in presence. The confidence that used to sit so easily on him, the easy charm, the casual certainty that he could talk his way through anything, was gone. In its place was something tighter, defensive. Celeste, on the other hand, looked composed. Too composed. Like she had already decided this was a misunderstanding that needed to be corrected, and all she had to do was speak in the right tone to make it happen. Adrian saw me, paused, then walked over. Celeste followed. "Lena," she said, her voice soft, measured. "We don't have to do this." I looked at her, then at him, then back at her. "It's already done," I said. Adrian stepped in, closer now. "This is insane," he said under his breath. "You actually took me to court." "I filed a legal process," I replied. "You're evicting me." "Yes." He let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Over a misunderstanding." I didn't answer, because there was nothing left to clarify. A clerk opened the door, called our case. We went inside. The room was smaller than I expected. A long table, a mediator at the front, no dramatic judge, no elevated platform, just a tired-looking woman with a stack of files and a pen in her hand. She glanced at the paperwork, then at us. "All right," she said, "let's keep this simple." Simple. That word mattered, because Adrian had built his entire approach on complexity, emotion, context, narrative. But the system didn't care about narrative. It cared about sequence. "Leaseholder?" the mediator asked, looking at me. "I am," I said. She nodded. "Occupant?" she said, turning to Adrian. He straightened slightly. "Yes." "Okay," she said, flipping a page. "This appears to be a sublease situation that was not completed. Leaseholder is seeking eviction based on failure to comply with sublease requirements." She looked at Adrian. "You want to respond?" This was his moment. I could feel it, the instinct to explain, to reshape, to soften the edges of what had happened. He took a breath. "She's my girlfriend," he said. "Not was. Is. She overreacted. We had a disagreement. I never refused to comply. I just needed more time. This whole thing escalated way too fast." The mediator didn't react, didn't nod, didn't frown, just wrote something down, then looked at me. "Leaseholder?" I didn't look at Adrian. I didn't look at Celeste. I looked at the mediator, and I spoke. Not about feelings, not about the relationship, about sequence. "The lease is solely in my name," I said. I slid the document forward. She glanced at it, nodded. I continued. "I provided a formal sublease offer with clear terms and deadlines." Another document. She accepted those terms in writing. Email printout. "Building management requires a completed application for any subtenant." Policy document. "The application submitted was incomplete. Required proof of income and credit authorization were not provided." Email from management. "I issued a notice to cure or quit, providing 3 business days to comply." Notice copy. Those requirements were not met within the stated time frame. I stopped. The room was quiet. Not tense. Just settled. Like everything that needed to be said had already been placed on the table. The mediator looked at Adrian. "Did you submit the required documents?" she asked. He hesitated. "Just a fraction. But enough." "I was going to," he said. "I just needed more time." She nodded once, then looked back at the file. "Did you request an extension in writing?" she asked. Another pause. "No." "Did you provide any of the missing documents?" "No, but..." She raised a hand slightly. Not harsh. Just enough. "That's fine." She wrote something else down, then leaned back in her chair. "All right," she said. "Based on the documentation, the leaseholder provided a valid path for continued occupancy under a sublease agreement. That path was accepted and then not completed. The notice to cure was properly issued. The deficiencies were not corrected." She looked directly at Adrian. "The leaseholder is within her rights." The words landed without volume, without drama, but they ended everything. Celeste inhaled sharply. Adrian's jaw tightened. "But this isn't," he started. "This is a legal proceeding," the mediator said calmly, "not a relationship discussion." Silence. Then, "I'm granting the eviction. You will have 14 days to vacate the premises." 14 days. That was it. No appeal to emotion. No reconsideration. Just outcome. Adrian didn't speak again. Not in the room. Not when we stepped outside. Not when Celeste tried to say something under her breath that sounded like disbelief wrapped in frustration. He just stood there, still, processing. And for the first time since I had known him, he had no words. No angle. No way to reshape what had already been decided. Because there was nothing left to negotiate. I adjusted the folder in my hand. Looked at him once. Not with anger. Not even with disappointment. Just recognition. Then I turned and walked away. Move-out day didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure being enforced. I scheduled it deliberately. Mid-morning. Weekday. When the building would be quiet, but not empty. I coordinated with management, requested a security presence, and confirmed everything in writing. Not because I expected a scene, but because I no longer left room for uncertainty. When I arrived, Adrian was already there. Boxes stacked near the door, some half-packed, some clearly rushed. The apartment looked wrong. Not destroyed, not trashed, just altered, like a place that had been used without being respected. Celeste stood near the kitchen, arms crossed tightly, watching everything with thinly veiled disapproval. Sienna was gone. Of course she was. She had disappeared the moment consequence became real. That, more than anything, told the truth. Adrian didn't greet me, didn't argue, didn't perform. He just kept packing, quietly. I walked through the apartment slowly, not to inspect, to register. The couch slightly misaligned, the kitchen counter cluttered, a faint stain near the sink, the air heavier than I remembered. And then, the bookshelf. I stopped. The ring was worse than in the photos. Still faint, still subtle, but permanent enough that you had to know what you were doing to fix it. I didn't say anything, didn't react, just took it in, then moved on. The rest of the process was procedural. Boxes carried out, keys gathered, checklist completed. At one point, Adrian walked past me, holding the last of his things. He paused, not fully turning. Just enough. I can't believe you did this, he said quietly. No anger this time. Just disbelief, like he was still trying to fit this version of me into the one he thought he knew. I looked at him, and for the first time, I answered without any edge at all. I can, I said. He swallowed, then shook his head slightly. You didn't have to go this far. I held his gaze for a second, then said the truth he never understood. I didn't go far, I said. I stopped letting things go. That landed. You could see it, because suddenly, everything that had seemed small to him, every moment, every assumption, every quiet override of my space had nowhere left to hide, too. He looked away first, picked up the box, and walked out. That was the last time I saw him. The apartment was silent after they left. Not the tense silence of absence. Not the fragile silence of something recently broken. Real silence. Owned silence. I stood in the middle of the living room for a long time, listening. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. Somewhere in the building, a door closed softly. Everything felt intact, even if it wasn't restored yet. The next week became process, not emotional, methodical. I hired professional cleaners, had every surface reset, walls patched and repainted where needed, floors polished, air cleared. And then, the bookshelf. I saved that for last, because it mattered most. I laid out everything I needed: sandpaper, oil, cloths, tools, and I worked, slowly, carefully, the way I had built it the first time, layer by layer. The damaged finish came off in thin, controlled passes. The ring faded, then disappeared. The grain beneath it came back to life, warm, clean, whole. When I applied the final layer of oil, I stepped back and looked at it. It didn't look new. It looked restored, stronger somehow, because I knew exactly what it had taken to bring it back. A week later, I finalized the deposit, itemized everything: cleaning, repairs, materials, labor. Then I sent Adrian the remaining balance, $87.50, along with the breakdown. No commentary, no message, just numbers. Closure in the only language he could no longer argue with. I heard through someone else, weeks later, that he had moved back in with his parents, that his temporary freedom had collapsed the moment it stopped being subsidized, that things with Sienna had faded. No surprise there. People like that don't stay when there's no space left to take. The truth is, the revenge wasn't the eviction. It wasn't the court. It wasn't even the silence. It was this, standing in my apartment, in my space, with everything exactly where I chose to put it. No negotiation, no intrusion, no quiet erosion of something I had built. He thought he could rewrite the terms of my life with a casual text. He thought my boundaries were flexible, optional, adjustable. He was wrong. I didn't argue. I didn't chase. I didn't explain more than necessary. I just changed the structure. And when the structure changed, he couldn't afford to stay.